a police officer, another person in a position of authority, or even just off of stories that I've heard this week of people who work in restaurants or people who are new into a neighborhood. I mean, I've heard so many stories of people experiencing discrimination, sometimes with violence. Obviously, for Mr. Floyd, it's the ultimate ending to that story. So much of it, I think, stems out of the sadness of not treating each other with the honor and respect that we deserve. And I feel tremendous sadness, and the stories that I continue to hear this week surround that sadness. And I don't think those stories are without hope, and I think that's part of why we want to have this conversation publicly today. I think I'm hearing messages that people want to know what the action steps are. It's one thing to have a conversation about it, and to say, well, that's never happened in our city that we know of. But I think it's very important for us to be defining specific action steps. If this was an easy problem, I think we would have already licked it. Because I know a lot of people in front of us have dedicated their lives, have given their lives to working on this problem, and yet still we have hate. All across our world we have hate. And hate is not a natural emotion, I don't believe. I believe hate is learned.
I thought, yeah.
And so, you know, again, that just brings me right back to sadness. And many of the people that are reaching out to me, sharing their thoughts with me, are sad. They're sad that it happens. They're sad that it's hate-based. They're sad that there's not an easy action step to just put their hand to and to work on. They're sad that after decades and decades of working on this, it still feels like it's a problem in our society. So that's sort of a big mishmash to answer your question. It's sort of how am I feeling,
right, yeah.
But it's also sort of what am I hearing from citizens who are reaching out to us. And most of what I'm hearing is an emotional-based response, and completely reasonable given the circumstances of what happened in Minneapolis and in what happens even in our city. Right. Some of the stories that I've heard, I'm very sad about. But we have to be working together to define what those action steps are to fight hate and to do better as people. Yes, as government, yes, as any organization that's working in our city, schools, restaurants, but it just boils down to us doing better as people.
Right, one-on-one. And we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the steps we're trying to move to, the actions we're going to come to at this table. Next up, Ms. Frida Powell, Mayor Pro Tem. You have certain responsibilities in the city as well as that go beyond your responsibility as a council member. You're well known in the community as a leader for equality and inclusion. What are some of your thoughts on the recent demonstration and how the city responded?
Well, David, first I want to say, I just want to say that I'm so proud of our Amarillo Police Department and Chief Birkenfeld and his police force, how they handled the protest and the demonstration this past weekend. What I want people to realize is that we do want a police presence, and why? It's to protect the individuals that are protesting, but it's also to protect property, but individuals first and then property. And we want to have a peaceful protest or march, and people have that right. You know, that's their First Amendment right to be able to do that and display that. And so to see that going on in our city, I am so proud, and we have to focus on our young people. I wanted to mention Julian Reese that was at the protest. You know, there was a little bit of conflict that took place. He stepped in the middle of it, you know, and he said, hey guys, we are not here to cause problems. This is a peaceful protest. And that's what we want. We want our young people being involved and trying to diffuse the situations that they can. And so when I look at racism, I go back and I tell people, I said, you know, you are not born into racism. Racism is something that is taught, you know. And I understand, you know, the African American community, because they have been dealing with racism since 1960s, 1950s, and some people are still living in that world today as if it was just like yesterday. I mean, it's real. And I understand that. My parents lived that. So we have to work together as a community to start to make a difference. And again, we've got to build trust. You know, we have to work with Chief Birkenfeld, and we have to continue the neighborhood policing, the community policing, you know, and trust goes both ways. So we have to rely on each other to do that.
I think the thing is we will come back and talk about some of the solutions we need to work for. But when you talk about the march on Sunday, you've got to give a credit to the men and women in the Amarillo Police Department.
Yes.
They were there as protectors and even as participants, and they let people have their voice and have their say, and that's a credit to you and the training and the systems that we have across the board. Generally, most minority communities have a pretty good relationship with their department. Those officers are our neighbors, they're our friends, they go to church with us. And that's what makes a difference, I think, in our police department compared to maybe some larger metropolitan areas. But what policies with these protests and marches and demonstrations, what policies do you already have set in place, Chief, in your department for this?
Well, one of the fundamental things that we train officers on the first week in the academy is constitutional law. And we want our police officers to understand exactly what we're talking about here, that people have the right to have their voice heard. And our job is absolutely not to take sides. We stand in the middle, and we make sure that that process is allowed to happen, and it's allowed to happen in a safe manner. So it's from the beginning of our academy all the way up through our recurring training. That's a common theme, is that we walk the line. We help make sure that voices are heard, at the same time making sure that property doesn't get damaged, making sure that people don't get hurt in the process. And so we're absolutely committed to that. Our policies are consistent with constitutional policing, and we want to make sure our training is that way too. And we have a lot of different training avenues, but certainly dealing with crowds is one of the things that we train on from time to time. And we want our officers to understand their role. I feel like most of them do. They themselves want to have a voice if they have a concern in the future. And so I think there's a lot of empathy from our officers, understanding, regardless of what their personal beliefs are, that they want to protect the rights of our citizens to have their voices heard.
Now, we've seen incidents across the nation. Some officers were fired in Atlanta just this week about the use of excessive force. What are some of the policies and mechanisms we have to ensure our department doesn't have those things, and how we handle them?
We spend a considerable amount of time. In fact, this very week, our current police academy is working on defensive tactics, and it's not just putting handcuffs on. It's talking about the philosophy of our use of force, and then it's the practical application of it, and then the aftercare of that as well. Because, you know, frankly, when we use force, sometimes it's very ugly.
Yes.
And we don't like to get ourselves in those situations, but sometimes police officers are forced to do that, and it's never going to look pretty. But once the situation is stable, our officers understand that, okay, now we've got to see about this person. Do we need medical care for them? Do we need, what else can we do to make sure that they don't come to further harm than what's already been done? And so that's built into our training. We also have recurring training every single year for every single police officer from the chief on down. We go through 8 hours of additional training on use of force issues and the practical application of those things, so that we make sure that we don't lose those thoughts and those philosophies and those perishable skills that we have. And again, built into that is, you know, de-escalation, communication, and then all through the different types of use of force. And then again, how do we recover from that personally, and how do we recover, help a person recover from a use of force incident?
As a member of the NAACP and working in my community, I think it's about energy too. Sometimes you guys, when you show up, you're met with some negative or some full force energy, and you have to respond the same way. I think it's incumbent on both sides to de-escalate and talk to each other like people. And sometimes a little situation can be blown up just by how we approach each other. And I think that's very important.
Absolutely. And we train our officers in crisis intervention, which covers a lot of different areas. You know, traditionally it was focused on mental health crisis, but really That crisis intervention training applies in a domestic violence situation. It could apply in a crowd situation where we learn that, okay, this is not personal. How can we bring this situation calmer? Because when I'm calmer and when you're calmer, we think better, we make better decisions. And that's our underlying philosophy for crisis intervention.
That's it, 100%. Mr. Miller, these policies of inclusion and sensitivity training, how do they filter through to all departments of the city?
Well, in 2017, I came here in 2017. Not long afterward, we had our Director of Human Resources, Mitchell Norman, in 2017 as well. We put together our annual core compliance training curriculum protocol, and all that does is ensures that we have a set group of training programs that every single employee goes through. One of those modules is diversity training. We also have sexual harassment prevention training, workplace harassment prevention training, customer service training. All of those things, to one degree or another, speak to how we address the people we work with and the people we work for. So we have that in our entire organization. We are developing that. We continue to grow that. We add modules over time. We're looking at going from, at first we were doing online training, now we're looking at bringing in-person training. It's more costly, but it's more effective. So we're working on continually improving how we provide that ongoing training, making sure that we provide it every year for all of our employees, and with anywhere from 22 to 2,500 employees a year, that's a lot of people, and that's a big program that we're administering there. So it's a process of continual improvement, though. There's never a point where you say, I've got the right training mix, because we are an evolving community. We are growing as people. We have to add in new trainings as technology and as situations warrant.
Do these situations, we've gone through the pandemic, and we know that's taxed our budget. Do things like this, how much of a burden is it on our finances here in this community?
Well, training is not something we're going to reduce funding for. We have taken significant steps, from freezing hiring of new employees to pausing major capital projects in the general fund and other things to make sure that we're in a good financial position. And we've done an extremely good job of making sure that we've made the cuts necessary to accommodate the reductions in revenue that we've seen associated with coronavirus. That said, training wasn't one of them. So we're going to continue forward with that. We're actually looking at expanding that, like I said, with more in-person training, but also adding to our training curriculum. One of the things that the police department does as part of their annual accreditation is training on implicit bias for all of the police officers every single year. We're looking at bringing an implicit bias training to the rest of the organization, how we do that, and how we can do that in a cost-effective way that also accomplishes the goal of implicit bias training and has that filter through our entire organization. That's something we haven't answered yet, but we're looking to expand that. I mean, it's very timely to be talking about it. Maybe it's late, absolutely it's late, but we're where we are, and we can only focus on making improvements from the point we find ourselves right now.
Right now.
So we are looking at making those changes, those enhancements. I don't have an answer exactly for when that's going to take place.
Right.
However, we do already have an effective training program in place. And we're going to focus on continually enhancing that and improving that.
The one question I always get is, so what are we going to do next? After the march, what's next? After this, what's next? For me, it falls upon the individual. You have to get connected. Council Connect, city council meetings, school board meetings. Show up, get a cause, be involved. It starts with each individual person. A group can't make you, legislation, laws can't make you treat me decently. That starts in each individual home and person. For the benefit of people who want to know, I don't think there's been an incident involving a questionable shooting or anything for some 20 years in Amarillo with the Amarillo Police Department. It's not something that's on our plate. We know it's there, and we know certain incidents happen. But what we need to focus on is how we can improve our neighborhoods, our communities, and our each individual homes, and that draws to the bigger, greater good. And I'm going to pose that same question to the mayor. What's the next step?
Yeah, well, it's what we've been talking about, right? I think the first step is awareness. So we have to continue doing things that make us aware of implicit biases that we might have. And we all have them.
We do.
Let's agree on
Let's be
that
honest,
point.
yeah.
Yes.
We all have implicit biases.
We do.
And so anytime we're made more aware, we increase our self-awareness about a bias that we might have in our thinking. And we might not have hate in our heart attached to that bias, but we probably have certain types of assumptions or biases present in our thinking that we need to bring those around. And so I think having conversations like this are good. It's sort of like eating breakfast, though. You need to do it every day. It needs to be part of our routine. So how can we as a community more routinely be proactive in having these type of conversations to make us more empathetic to each other's lives, to each other, walking in each other's shoes? I was at a meeting this morning, and Pastor Anthony Harris talked a lot about the children, and Mayor Pro Tem Powell mentioned that. So I think our best energy is spent at that generation. So the good news is they're eager to learn, and we love spending time with them. The bad news is that's decades long to see that change implemented through them. But someday they'll be sitting where we are and where you guys are. And everything we can do today to build a better foundation, remove those biases, absolutely remove hate, that's a good action step. It's not a quick fix, but it's a great action step. So everywhere we can look into every youth program, if you operate a youth program in our city, I would love for you to begin thinking about how do we incorporate implicit bias training, and that's a very adult, bureaucratic word, but how do we incorporate into our youth programs, whether you're a sports program, maybe you're a scouting program, maybe you're a religious or faith-based youth program, how do you begin to incorporate some implicit bias type training into the conversation that you're having with the kids that you're around? Obviously, our school districts, I think, do a good job, and they try very hard. So anything we can do as parents or neighbors to participate with our school. But I think there are opportunities that we don't have our eyes on yet. So I'm hoping that this conversation floods the mayor's inbox, and I'm sure Frances is shuddering as she thinks, oh, great. Yeah. Let's hear the ideas. Let's have a great conversation about the ideas. I don't think any one of the four of us up here would begin to represent to you we have the ideas. But what we do know is that the ideas are out there in our community, and we, for a moment, are placed in a God-given position to try and move the ball forward. And that's our heart. We want to move the ball forward.
My grandmother used to say, a closed mouth don't get fed. Right. You have to let me know what the problem is.
Yes.
And that's what we need to do.
And I'll say, too, just to add on,
go ahead.
When you send an email or you want to have a conversation about it, my grandmother used to say, you get further with sugar than you do with spice.
Energy.
And so I will just say, it's not, if you choose to be angry, that's your American right to do that. But just coaching for just a moment on how to win friends and influence people, your thoughts, your messages are better received when they are written in a calm, reasonable tone. So I wish it didn't, but tone does matter. And so I would coach you if you're going to an organization asking for change, no matter whether it's a racial topic or any other kind of topic, watch your tone. Lead with the right tone. Lead with a tone of influence.
That's it. Same question for you, Pro Tem.
Yes.
What is the next step?
So I'll just tag on for just a moment. So my emotions on a daily basis are all over the page, and sometimes it's very hard for me to contain those emotions, but I try not to let others see that, you know. I mean, this past week my hair was standing on fire, as they say, you know, because of all that was going on. But we have to do the best that we can to keep things into perspective. And so our next step is Chief Birkenfeld and I, along with Mayor Nelson, we were in a meeting this morning. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to have a youth forum with our kids, and we need to do it with with all of law enforcement so that they have an opportunity to ask questions. You know, well, what happens when you pull me over? You know, what happens, you know, when I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing? But the kids need to have that opportunity to interact and ask those questions. I think the next steps are, we're already doing it, and that is our police officers have to be present in every community, and not just when a robbery takes place, you know, or somebody gets shot. You know, I mean, they have to start building those relationships before those incidents happen. And if the police are present in the communities, that's going to be a great help. We, as elected officials, we have to be present. Now, I just want people to realize that we cannot be everywhere. Right. I mean, now some days Frida Powell splits herself in half.
Yeah, and
you know,
2 or 3
but I'm serious. We can't be everywhere every day. Yeah. But I try my best. I go through my list and I pick out, before COVID-19, I would pick out at least 10 things a week that I'm going to have to go and do. And yes, it's challenging. Right. But we need to be in those communities. I've worked hard the past 30-some years trying to build relationships. And I'm just an individual. I just didn't want to sit around and say, well, what can I do in the African-American community, or there's nothing going on. And I decided a long time ago that I was going to reach out to other communities. I wanted to build relationships in the Hispanic community, and the Asian community, and the Caucasian community, you know, whatever community it is, because you cannot have too many relationships. You cannot have too many friendships, too many contacts. And it's important, because when someone has an issue, they feel that they can reach out to you. You know, and my goal was to build that relationship, to build that trust, and I wanted them to have a safe space that they can come to me with any issue and know that I'm not going to throw you under the bus. Right. You know, and I'm sure our city manager can tell you, I've come to him with a lot of issues, and he says, well, where's this coming from? And I'm like, let's just focus on the problem, you know. But that's what I want people to know is trust goes both ways.
Yeah, it does.
And it can never be one-sided.
One-sided of it. Chief, I'm going to pose that same question to you. What's the next step? I know one thing is the next step. We talked about being present in those communities. You need officers. Men, women, green, black, gray, whatever. If you feel like this is, you want to protect and you want to serve your community, he needs officers. He needs trained young men and women with the right mindset to patrol the streets.
Absolutely, David. And one of the key points in that is that we need a diverse police force. And our police force should look like our community looks. And part of that is our responsibility to make sure we're recruiting in all the right places. And that's one of our priorities. Is recruitment and retention, and making sure that we're reaching out, looking in every corner of Amarillo to make sure that we're letting people know the police department is a good career and it's an honorable career. And I know in some communities that's hard to get that message out because of historical differences that have occurred between police departments in some communities. And so we have to do our part. We would also encourage community leaders to put that out in front of their young people and give them, you know, there should be lots of options out there, but sometimes until somebody tells you you can do something, you may not realize that. And so you may find a young person in your community that, gosh, they would be a good police officer, and encourage them to come to us, and we'd love to have that. Council's provided us plenty of resources to get officers, and so that's not the problem. The problem is on the recruitment side, and that we're working on that actively. We're going to look top to bottom over the next few months at our recruitment process and see if there's anything we're missing in order to get a more diverse police force and to fill those numbers up. It's no secret that nationwide police recruiting has been difficult for the past few years, but it's not impossible. And we still get lots of good young people that come into our department and do an outstanding job, and that's the kind of folks we're looking for. And then in this morning's meeting, it was pointed out that you can't change, or it's harder to change what's in a person's heart. And so as a police chief, I want to make sure that the officers we're hiring have the right heart, the heart of service, the heart of inclusion, and wanting to make their community better. And so that's the kind of police officers that we're looking for. If you had to be super strong and super tough, I never would have made it, because I'm kind of a skinny guy. But it's not what's on your body, it's what's in your heart that's going to make a difference.
It's a thinking man and woman's game. It's not
Absolutely.
about force. Yep. Mr. Miller, what's the next step? Where do we move forward when it comes to race relations and in our community?
Well, I think there's a number of different perspectives on that, on what's next. Organizationally, you know, I mentioned our Director of Human Resources who had the idea for the core compliance training and how we've been growing that, and that, you know, allowing people that have good ideas to take the lead on programs and come up with those ideas and develop them. You know, we're going to definitely facilitate that. We need to continue that. And there's no one program, you know, I know I mentioned some, but there's no one program that fixes anything. They contribute to an awareness in our organization, a focus on how we're going to, whether it's customer service or appreciating and valuing diversity or whatever I'm talking about. I don't want to minimize any of those, but none of those are the solutions. So we have to, from an organizational standpoint, we have to continually be looking at new ideas and new ways to be doing it. For me, for myself personally, you know, and I think for everybody up here, you know, we are in this role because we truly appreciate service and making a positive difference in people's lives. We have a bigger microphone and a bigger ability to influence our community. So that requires us to look very deeply inside ourselves to make sure that we're doing things for the right reason and to make sure that we're bringing everyone along in that process. Yeah. To that end, you know, I want to make sure that everyone knows if you have an idea for how we can be doing something better, I want to hear it. You know, whether it's a community member, whether it's one of our team here at the city, our council, you know, we want to make sure that we are being as empathetic and open-minded to new ideas or even to looking at challenges within ourselves to be able to make our community better for everybody. I think that's an internal organizational approach. It looks at mechanical things that we can do, but it also looks at motivational things that we can evaluate within ourselves to make sure that we're always on the right course. We always have to assess where are we going in the right direction. But I think it's bigger than that. You know, the city, the organization, the council, you know, our team, we can't fix this problem. You know, we can make it better. We can incrementally make better change, but to an extent we might be fighting a tide.
Yeah.
And there's no pastor. There's no citizen that can do it all, but together, you know, working together and finding opportunities to cooperate and collaborate, we can definitely make more difference. And then once we have that regional collaboration, we can expand that to a larger conversation. You know, I've had people come to me and say, why are people protesting in Amarillo? This is a national and global issue, and people are expressing their desire for change, desire for improvement, crying out for, you know, what has happened. It's right and it's fitting, and I respect and appreciate how it's been done. But working together as a community is something that we also need to do. Yeah. Working together with our jurisdictional partners, partnering with the counties in different ways that we, you know, in different programs. And I'm speaking hypothetically. I don't know what specific program we might be able to do. You know, with the police department, sheriff's offices, and with the courts and the commission and with our different employee teams. So there's a lot of things that we can do. And I know a scattershot, but there's a lot of next steps.
There's a lot of next steps. We're going to hit one question real quickly. There's been an issue about a restaurant and a name and a businessman and this name of this restaurant. And how does the city feel? Is this a racial slur? LULAC has come out against this statewide. Are there any options that the city can do? I, for one, am for business, but I am also one for respect and knowing better and doing the right thing.
I want to jump in and just start the answer to this question and just say, I personally will not be going to a restaurant that has a name that isn't respectful and honoring to a certain class, type, age, ethnicity group of people in our city. So it makes me very sad, and I don't think that reflects who we are in Amarillo, and it certainly doesn't reflect the target that we have as a mission, and that is for everyone in our city to be respected and to feel safe in being the way that God made them to be. So that makes me very sad. Now, it does go back to the heart. You know, we can't know what's in that person's heart who chose that name for their business. I can't know what's in their heart. And it is challenging for government to legislate morality. We do it in having, laws against murder, laws against hate crimes. But you're not winning someone's heart just because you legislate their behavior. And so it does come back to a heart matter. I'm grateful to live in the United States of America where we have a free market economy, and I get to show my heart on the matter with my consumer dollars.
That's it.
And I can promise you my consumer dollars will not be going to that restaurant. But it comes back to being an individual decision. We each individually use our marketplace dollars to not shop there. And then we try to go out in the community reflecting our heart in a way that, love beats hate every time.
Every time.
But it's not always as quick as we want it to be. But, there's some operational components to your question from the city's point of view. I might hand those over to Jared.
Sure, and I would, before I even got into the regulatory aspect of it, I would echo what the mayor said. Deciding how you spend your money in your community says a lot about what you value and where your character is. And people can debate about is it appropriate or inappropriate. I would say from a regulatory standpoint, the city doesn't have the authority to regulate the content of a sign in this situation. Just like we don't have the authority to regulate the content when it doesn't have those specifically called out things that are illegal. We don't have the authority to regulate the content of a billboard or anything else. So the name of the business in this case is not something that we have the authority to regulate or to cause any change there. Our citizens can, absolutely, by how they spend their money and how they choose to spend their money based on their personal beliefs and whether or not they think that's an appropriate name or not. We have our city attorney in the room. I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add there from a regulatory standpoint or from a legal standpoint about what we can or cannot do.
Thank you for having me. No, I think you've been I think that is correct in every aspect. The naming of a business is a form of expression that's protected by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and thus that is why any law or statute or rule that a city might pass or that a state might pass that would regulate that right or take that right away would be invalid. And thus, that's why a city doesn't weigh in and doesn't censor a business name. They simply have no authority to do so. And that's about as succinctly as I can
It's part of the challenge in living in a society with the freedoms that we have.
That's it.
Is that I believe in your freedom to say what you want to say. I'm not always going to agree with it. Sometimes it's going to wound me deeply, especially if it's something that wounds my friend or, insults a group of people just based on who God made them to be. But it is part of the other side of the coin to the beauty of calling ourselves Americans and living under the freedoms that we have under the Constitution.
That's it. We're going to hit some quick questions real quick. Doug with the Globe News. Go right ahead, sir. Step up to the mic.
Douglas Clark, Amarillo Globe News. This question is for Chief Birkenfeld. Chief, there are 348 officers on the force. 82% are white, 16% Hispanic, and 2% black. This obviously does not reflect the Amarillo community. How is this going to be addressed, and could you provide a few more details as to what the recruitment process looks like?
Well, right now, we reach out to different community events and to job fairs and college classes, and I'm not sure that we're reaching far enough, and I won't know until I get a good look at our recruitment process in depth, and that's one of my first projects. In fact, probably the highest priority we have now is our recruitment process. Like I talked about yesterday in the first-year game plan, our department has to be representative of our community, and so that's absolutely a priority. It's hard to dig down into details right at the moment because I haven't got a good grasp of what that's going to look like, but I guarantee that we're going to look deep into our community and make sure that we market the department and the city in a way that people understand, hey, this is a calling and it may be in your heart to do that, and we need representation from all corners of our community for our department to be effective, and that's all about building trust, and that's the core of what we want to do.
Of that group, 90% of the officers are male and 10% female. Is that also
Absolutely.
an area which plans to be addressed?
Absolutely. again, diversity covers a lot of different terminology, and we need, females in our department are very important, males are important, people of all different languages and colors are very important, and it adds so much richness to our culture when we have a diverse workforce, and that's my goal, is to increase that diversity significantly, because I think we've done a good job, but I think we can do a lot better.
Could you provide more details as to what the training element looks like to aid in preventing a circumstance as a situation that occurred in Minneapolis? Of course, we know that you can't do anything to prevent anything, but what type of training is in place to aid the potential prevention of something like that from occurring?
Well, from start to finish, we have different levels of force that could be used in a situation, but in every case, the very first level is our presence and our dialogue, and that's what we teach officers, and we do that in recurrent training as well as in the academy, presence and dialogue. And if it has to get beyond that, then we have a step escalation that we follow. Once that force has been used, then there's a step we call recovery, and basically we help the person, it's hard to talk about particular incidents without actually being there, but if I had a person who I handcuffed and they were on the ground and they were on their stomach, my next step is to bring them up, probably put them in a police car, but if I'm waiting for an ambulance, for example, put them in what paramedics also call the recovery position, where they can breathe normally, they're sitting on their behind, and even if they're still on the ground, if they're handcuffed, we teach officers that's a good position, that there's not a lot a person can do to hurt you from that position. Now, we have had cases where persons, even while they're handcuffed, become very violent and kicking and biting and spitting and things like that. If we see that occurring, then we're going to have to take additional steps. But once a person's compliant, we expect them to be treated with respect. We expect them to get the medical care they need, and that is a core part of our training, and that's trained to every officer every year.
Mr. Lovejoy, you mentioned that the police department is looking for men and women with the right mindset. I don't know exactly what that means.
When you say mindset, that it's willing to serve your community. You see this image of an officer running and jumping and shooting and firing, and there's some police officers who've never pulled their weapon in the line of duty. The job is much more than being the super cop or being the superhero. It's being a liaison between citizens, law enforcement, the law, and the city. And that's what we mean by the mindset of, are you here to really protect and serve, or are you here to legislate your own brand of justice? I guarantee you no one in the sheriff's departments here or the Amarillo Police Department, that's weeded out. I've got neighbors, one of the longest serving African-American veterans and first sergeant and a detective on that force is a good friend of mine. And that is the mindset they push forward, and they try to push forward to everybody is, don't be that guy. Don't be that one that comes in and just is disrespectful and rude. You're going into someone's neighborhood. You're going into someone's house. That's how you should approach it.
Okay. Mayor Nelson, at yesterday's council meeting, you mentioned that you were concerned about gun violence. During Sunday's protest march through the San Jacinto neighborhood, there were several individuals that had displayed weapons along the route, including an individual who displayed a semi-automatic AR-15 while on one of the rooftops as the processional passed through the area. What are your general thoughts on something like that occurring within your city?
I am not a fan of intimidation. So it doesn't matter that a gun was involved, or, you said a scenario where a gun was involved, and clearly that's scary if a gun's involved in an intimidation situation. But we should not be trying to intimidate and bully each other. That is not the solution to moving our city forward. So if you have an idea, you need to have the courage to sit down at a table with other people and share your idea. And if your idea is the majority viewpoint, then your idea moves forward in our society. We've never been a society that uses force to push our ideas. And I don't think that's a society that we want to be a part of. So if someone is using a gun to get what they want, whether it's through intimidation or through actual violence, I have a problem with that. Now, I own a gun. My family owns guns. I believe in our right to bear arms. I do not believe that the government should restrict, unreasonably our ability to protect ourselves by owning guns. However, I do not believe that our city will be where it needs to be, that we will be the city that we want to live in if we are using intimidation tactics of any kind to try and influence people's behavior or change their ideas.
Final question. This panel discussion is about inclusivity and equality. Can anyone speak to the number of department heads of color that are currently in place with the city of Amarillo?
Oh, with regard to African American, there's 2.
What about other groups?
Okay, I didn't know. I wanted to understand clearly exactly, where you're going there. From Mitch, can you give us the exact numbers? Right, right.
And out of how many total?
About 30.
30.
Okay, that does it for me.
Thank you, Doug. Next, we'll go with the young man, KCIT, or you want KBII 7?
Hi there, guys. I'm Matt Kinchel from ABC 7. I just wanted to touch on, as far as the protest this past weekend, overall it was pretty peaceful, but there were some serious threats on social media about, driving through crowds and stuff like that. How do you kind of deal with those rumors, and what's serious, what's not?
I'm going to start and then maybe hand it to you guys on operationally, but I'll just go back to the intimidation answer. And I just refuse for there to be anyone in our city who's using intimidation to change people's behavior or to keep people from exercising the right that they have as an American, whether that's free speech, the right to assemble, the right to attend a worship service. I just think intimidation is a very poor tool. It's not a leadership tool, and it's not welcome in our city in any form. So operationally, though, I'll let you guys speak to.
We have a team of crime analysts that have a lot of skills into looking and researching into not only what people put out, but what their history is. And in an event like this, such as last weekend, our crime analysts were on 24/7, and we had a lot of good tips come in from the community regarding different threats, and we looked at every single one of those, and we had bulletins for the officers who were on scene to watch for certain people to make sure that they didn't try to carry out their threats. And so we're very proactive in that. I was amazed at what our crime analysts were able to produce using the tools that we give them to basically conduct a threat assessment on each individual who put something out there that indicated they might be a proponent of violence or actually commit violence themselves.
Chief, how would a citizen contact the department if they saw something on Facebook that they felt like needed to be analyzed?
Certainly, you can call our non-emergency number at 378-3038 and report that to a dispatcher, and we can put an officer in touch with you who can get that information. If it seems a little less emergent, you could call a tip into Crime Stoppers. We had some of the tips came in through Crime Stoppers, some of them through our regular dispatch, and then some of them through direct messages to me and to other officers just with concerns about what was going on.
Okay, and how much are federal authorities assisting with these protests as far as helping the city out?
From the law enforcement perspective, we didn't have any federal assistance. It was a local issue, and we took care of it with just Amarillo police officers. Both sheriff's offices have offered their support if we need help, and we would help them, but there wasn't any federal involvement in this particular incident.
As far as the mayor's concerned, I don't have any plans to reach out and request further help from the governor's office or certainly from a federal level. So as it appears right now, our local authorities are more than capable of handling it.
I think we have to be careful on what we call things, too. That which took place on Sunday wasn't a protest, it was a march. They weren't trying to overturn anything or they weren't burning anything. They just want to peaceably march through the streets and have their voices heard. A rally, what the NAACP is having this weekend. There's not going to be any table turning and chairs. That's not what we're here for. We're here for a positive outcome. And when that's the thing, just like this meeting here, what's next, and that's what we look for.
Okay. And final question, are people coming from a different location, different state? Is that something you worry about? I hear other locations kind of having that concern. Is that something you're worried about?
I don't think so. I don't think so. We're a close-knit community. We know each other. We see each other, and we know who's who. You know, it's really weird. It's 6 degrees of separation of he might know somebody. Well, I know him through this person, this person. Same way with everybody across this room, and that's one thing about our community. We're not here to let outsiders influence our decisions and how we treat each other.
And I wonder, Chief, I mean, again, you're going to prepare the same way,
Right.
whether it's local folks or outside folks. So it's a little bit of the expect the best, prepare for the worst, as far as, you know, your officers being on the scene and present. So
Absolutely. Some of the social media that we were being directed to certainly came from outside Amarillo, but we had no report or indication of outsiders coming in to actually participate in the march.
Okay, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Good
Welcome to
questions.
Amarillo, young man.
yes.
Ruben Flores, KAMR. First question, what is the city doing to plan for future rallies, future protests, and why is it important to take every threat serious?
Well, from a operational standpoint, a lot of times we'll get, and I'm speaking hypothetically because, you know, we don't, aside from the NAACP march next week, you know, I'm not aware of any that are being planned, but I would say if that is something that people want to do, coordinate with the city so that we can talk about route, so that we can talk about preparations, so that the police department can be aware and that make their plans. And that's not plans that aren't, those are plans that are going to facilitate a safe and effective event. You know, for example, with the police department, you know, there's a lot of support and a lot of coordination that goes into supporting and providing for the safety of the participants, providing for the safety of our community, making sure that everyone is being taken care of. But that's visible support. It's also a lot of invisible support, you know, a lot of background support, both from the administrative side and then from people being prepared. So we're going to provide a lot of support to people and a lot of assistance and advice. Hopefully that can help provide for an effective event that can keep your participants hydrated and safe. I mean, there's a lot of things to think about when you're talking about a long event in the heat and other things. So we want to be a tool to be able to facilitate safe events for everyone involved. And is there anything, Chief, you or
the planning.
The planning
Yeah.
is very helpful.
Always goes better with the plan.
Yeah. When it just pops up out of the blue, we'll still provide
That's
that
okay.
support in what ways that we can, but we're missing out on half of that coordination. You know, we're working to help, but we want to make sure that we're on the same page with people that would march.
Next question for Chief Birkenfeld. Why is it important for your officers to live in the community and get to know the community and know the people that they police?
What was the first part that you said?
Why is it important for your
Important?
officers?
Well, we're invested in the community, and Amarillo is kind of unique because we're a little bit of an island, and most of the officers that work here live here or live close by, and so it gets you invested in the community. For example, if I mess this job up, I'm going to be answering to my family and friends about why the department's not being effective, and I think that helps us because it invests me in doing a good job. Our officers feel the same way. They're protecting not only everybody, but their own family and friends that live here. And so I think it's very important that we have that kind of investment in our community. One of my priorities is building a culture of community involvement. We have a lot of police officers and a lot of our civilian staff that already, they go out and volunteer their own time in their churches or in their favorite charities to help out in the community. And I want to reward that. I want to encourage that because that is a part of being a police department, is being involved in the community, and it can't just be 8 to 5 when you go to work. It needs to be when you go home and when you're talking with your church family and your friends. I want to encourage that kind of involvement.
Last question for the Chief. You know, when officers in other places make mistakes and people turn on all officers, what do you tell your guys to help them get through this situation?
I went to the midnight briefing on Saturday night for that exact reason. And our officers have to feel encouragement. And there's always going to be bad days in a job, but I want our officers to understand that they're doing good and that they've done the right things. And so I don't want them to feel like they're being punished for somebody else's mistakes. And so we try to offer encouragement through good leadership and visible leadership and make sure our officers know we have a great police department. And I have to commend the officers that worked over the weekend in helping make sure that this march was safe. A lot of officers worked some long hours, some planning. They took out from their weekend, which they might normally be off. And so I have to commend the men and women of the police department that do the hard work. But trust me, they're very invested in it. They love what they do, and they have servants' hearts. But it's my job to make sure that we encourage that, and that we make sure that just because something happens somewhere else, it is going to affect our community, and it's probably a good teaching or reteaching moment, but we can't get too downtrodden from that. We'll recover from that. We can learn. We'll continue to do a good job, and hopefully that'll keep everybody's attitudes and spirits up.
And I want to add, a couple weeks ago, we started a new field training officer class, and it's new field training officers. We have some senior field training officers, but these are the ones that are brand new, so they're between 3 and 5 years of experience typically. Some of them have a little bit more time on the force when they go through the field training officer training, but part of this program is to bring a speaker in every day during the deal at lunch, right after lunch, to speak to them about leadership, because these are people that are taking on a leadership role. It's probably the initial leadership role in any police career, is to train the next generation of police officers as they go through field training after they finish their academy. And we talked about the responsibility that they have when they do that. I talked a little bit about, there's reasons why you got into police work. And you got into police work after some of the sentiment nationally towards police officers have changed. And I think one of the things that they have that's a benefit here in Amarillo is the relationship between the police department and our community is maybe different. It's better, I think, than many places in the nation. That doesn't mean we rest on our laurels and we just relax in that good relationship, because it takes a lot of work to maintain a good relationship. Anybody that's been married or had a relationship knows that. But this is no different. It takes a lot of work to maintain that. And I was talking to them about the responsibility that they have to take that relationship to the next step, to continue to improve that relationship, and to use that positive relationship with our community almost as a recruiting tool, because we don't have some of the negative pressures on the police department here in Amarillo from a relational standpoint, from a customer service standpoint, that other departments are having to deal with. And we want to make sure that we don't allow ourselves to get into that position through complacency or through bad choices. So they have responsibility as leaders. I know they're the right people to step up and uphold those responsibilities, but go farther than that, to take that leadership step that's going to enhance further our relationship with our community and the commitment in the department to that.
Perfect. That's all I have.
Young lady from News Channel 10.
Hi, I'm Lisa Miller from News Channel 10. My first question is, I was at the protest and rally on Sunday, and I had spoken with a man who said, in my 40 years of living here, I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen Amarillo come together like this. And you guys had kind of said, following the death of George Floyd, we are seeing that more. So my question is, I don't know, for Mayor or for anyone that would like to answer this, is kind of what we're seeing in Amarillo and people coming together like this unusual and unheard of? Has it happened before?
No, I've seen it in other forms.
Yeah,
and
I
other,
have too.
And
I have too. It's not unusual.
Yeah, it's sort of what the community is. I think for this particular issue, it might be sort of unusual, but I grew up here in Amarillo. Besides my military service at college, I can remember the protest over the rebel flag at Tascosa High School in the 70s. People came together for that. The Robert E. Lee School, elementary school here just recently, people came together for that. The old Colonel in the Park, about 4 or 5 years ago, we had that issue. And they had different opinions. The Confederate soldier in the park was sprayed with graffiti, and someone who was against it came out and cleaned it. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of community we have here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as a whole, the Amarillo community has always been very caring. We are a different culture here in Amarillo, but it's friendly. And as you can see in the passing of Mr. Floyd, I mean, there were people from all nationalities, all races, all cultures, backgrounds that came together for that march because they care. They care.
Perfect. My next question is for Police Chief. I know that last week you guys kind of took to social media saying that there would be a police presence, really just to keep our city safe. And I know that there's another protest coming up on Saturday. Is there anything that you and your officers are doing, kind of changing based on what we saw and the peacefulness that we saw last weekend?
We have to get the vocabulary right.
Yeah.
We're not having a protest.
Yeah.
We're having a rally. There's a difference, a march, a protest, and a rally. What are we going to protest against? We have other issues besides George Floyd right here in our community that we need to address. So the idea that it's a protest kind of gives it a bad energy. And so it's not a protest. We're having a rally, the Amarillo Branch NAACP. We're having a rally so people can see the ways to change their community.
My apologies
No,
for the
you're okay.
rally.
I got a personal invite to the rally, so I'll be there. We have lots of community events that we go to, and this is a great one. And we'll have several police officers there to talk to people, and that's our goal for this type of event. We're always prepared for the worst case scenario because, we're in tornado season, for example, right now. So a tornado could hit Amarillo. We're prepared to deal with that and any other types of crisis. So sometimes we get more prepared than others, but for this particular event, we're going to be there. We're going to listen. We're going to talk, and that's our goal for that.
For what happened on Sunday, how much did that cost to have that police presence there?
I don't have the exact figures for that. Certainly we had to spend some extra money, but to me, it was very much needed. And I'm not going to sacrifice anybody's safety worrying about money. We'll figure out ways to pay for that if we have to cut in other places or whatever. But your safety is more important than worrying about money at the time. And so we'll do what we have to do, and then we'll figure out ways within reason to make sure that we can pay for that.
My last question, you guys talked about youth forums. Is that something that we can see, and starting with the children, starting with them young, is that something that we can see, in our Amarillo school districts or anything like that in the coming years?
Yeah, and I believe that our Amarillo Independent School District, they are doing a lot of different forums, for different topics. And so I know that there's a huge police presence already there. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to sit down, with a group of law enforcement, and then our youth will have an opportunity to ask questions, just all over the page for better understanding. Because we have to engage our youth, and they have a different mindset.
And that's something the NAACP is working with law enforcement, local attorneys, so we can drop that wall. Half of this is fear and what they hear and see, and not really forming a relationship across and reaching across and knowing different, and both sides. And so that's what we're going to do moving forward. It comes to the community. School districts, like you said, you can't legislate this. It has to become organic and in your community, in your home, individually. And I think that's the path.
And when it comes to recruiting, that's that's a challenging part, because when you go to recruit anyone, whether it's a minority or anyone else, it's all about the perception, And so if they don't have a good relationship with our police officers, you have some of the young people who are like, well, I don't want to be a police officer because, I don't want to snitch on my friend, or I don't want to turn my friend in. And so until we can build that trust, that's going to help later on in recruiting. I've recruited, and so if you have never done it, there are so many challenges involved. And if you don't have workforce-ready individuals for that particular position, then you have to hire from outside. And what you face then is you're trying to relocate someone that's not familiar with the area. They have no family support, no family structure. That's another issue. Why? Because they're not going to stay very long. They're going to leave and they're going to go back. And so recruiting is very challenging. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you did a great job.
Okay.
Perfect.
Good.
That is it.
Thank you so much. We'll wrap this up. Thank you for being here, but I think it would be appropriate. Mayor, do you have any last words for us?
I just want to say that it's what everyone has touched on. It is an individual thing. It is in need of constant working on self-awareness. It's like working on a marriage. You have to do it every day. The best time to work on your marriage is not when it's in crisis, but before, right? And so while this is happening not in our city, I do think it is an opportunity for us to be proactive and to analyze how we can do this better in our city. And I would recommend to you a book. It's a difficult read. It's not a PG read, but Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers is a book that will open our eyes to the idea that just because I say ABC, the person I'm saying that to might hear XYZ. And so it is about making sure our messages are what our heart intends them to be. And it takes a lot of work. I mean, even with my husband, it takes a lot of work. And I'm with him all the time and know him inside and out. So when I think, wow, communicating with someone I've never met before in our community, the challenge just grows with that. But we can do it. And I want this to end on a message of hope. We can do it. We want to do it. And you have a set of leaders up here who want to work together with you as well to make sure that our city is doing it better every single day.
And you know, we talked about mindset early on too, and I always have a desire to seek understanding. You know, to try to understand where someone else is coming from. I want to understand their background. I want to understand what their issue is, what their problem is, and you know. I have the mindset that I want to please everyone, but that's not realistic. But I have to always, you know, shoot for 110%, maybe to please about 95 or 96% of the people. But I think the mindset is it doesn't matter who it is. You are for the human being. You're for that person.
Well said, my friend.
Chief,
Thank you.
I just want to reemphasize how much our police officers love what they do. It's a calling. And we will continue to protect Amarillo and protect the rights of the individuals to speak, protect our property rights, and protect our lives. We're absolutely committed to that. And we appreciate the overall city leadership and philosophy because it's very supportive of that, and we're going to continue to do that.
Mr. Miller?
Just in closing, I would echo what the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Powell said. You know, figuring out a way to communicate in a way that's effective, that's sympathetic, that actually hears what people are saying. Rather than just staying silent long enough to be able to get to a pause where you can say your next thought. So effectively listening to what people are saying and being able to understand their situation, their condition, and what they need, and finding a way to get there is going to be very important. So as a community, you know, having that, for me, you know, this time we're in right now, especially, you know, and it prompted by George Floyd, sure. But it's created an introspectiveness in me that I want to do. I want our organization to be very effective here. But I also would say that this is a long-term thing. Doug asked a very good question. How many leaders in the organization of color do we have? You know, that's something we can only address through time. And it's not just an administrative challenge. It's a police challenge and everything else. We've talked about the recruiting. Developing the sense in our community from people with the skill sets that we need that will help us better represent our community, and having them understand that we're a valuable place to work, we're a worthwhile place to work where you can make a difference in people's lives, a positive difference in people's lives, I think will help. We do need to do better there. We do need to be an organization that looks like our community. It is going to be a long-term, you know, work, many steps in the same direction. You know, as the mayor said, you know, it is going to make a difference there without continually changing course. You know, so that's something we definitely want to be very effective at in the meantime. And while we're working on that, we definitely need to get better at listening and applying where possible the input from all of our community, from all parts of our community.
We have a lot of things to do in a day. People have a lot of different jobs. Some you might deem more important, like the chief of police or the mayor of the city. Some might be about education or wealth or power. But there's one thing each and every one of us can do every day. We can say a kind word to someone, and we can treat them with respect. Let's go forward with that first. Thank you.
Thank y'all.